I welcome you all to our journey towards becoming web developers. We can't just start delving into the various technologies used for web development without knowing how the web works. So quickly, we'll be taking a look at some key technologies that work together to ensure the operations of websites are successful. First of all, let's take a look at clients. When you hear the name client, what comes in your mind? You are building a website for a client, which is a human being. You are working on a client's bicycle or motorbike. No, in this context, you are right in that context. That's plain English language. But in this context, in the internet world, client is an application that runs on your computer, such as Firefox, SpiderMonkey, Google Chrome, and the like. Its primary role is to take user interactions and translate them into requests to another computer called a web server. Don't worry if you don't know what a web server is. The computer, which is our client, we the user will input requests into it. For it to work, go to the server and get information to us. Quickly, let's look at what a server is. A server is also a computer which is always connected to the internet. What is the key difference here? Your computer can work both offline and online. We all agree that it's not all the time that our computer is powered with internet. We do work with our computer offline and also online, but the server is always 24/7 connected to the internet. That's the key difference, and it has an IP address. Shortly, we'll get to know what an IP address is. The primary function of a web server is to store, process, and deliver web pages to clients. That's what it does and nothing else. The client asks for information from the server, and it's the duty of the server to deliver the information or to obey the instruction of the client and deliver what the client needs. That's if only it has it or it knows it. Now let's take a look at IP address. What is an IP address? An IP address, it is an acronym that stands for Internet Protocol Address, and is a numerical identifier for a device such as a computer, server, printers, etc. And every computer on the internet has an IP address that is used to identify and communicate with other computers. Now let's look at something. You have a postal address to your house. Everybody has a postal or a unique postal address to his or her house. That is how servers also does. They also have IP addresses. Computers also have what? IP addresses, which with the help of this IP addresses, they are able to communicate with each other. And we are saying that this IP address, if it has forward set of numeric characters or numbers. This is an IP address. This is an IP address which contains what? These 4 digits. Now, we'll be delving into them. You will know what it is. We will know why IP addresses are coming into the picture. Now, let's look at what ISP. When we hear ISP, what does what ISP mean? ISP, which is our number 4 here, is also an acronym which stands for Internet Service Provider. ISP is just a company that provides internet access to organizations and home users. What exactly do ISP do? In short, an ISP provides you with internet access, usually for free. Without ISP, you wouldn't be able to shop online, access Facebook, IG, WhatsApp, and all those social media applications that you want. So the primary aim or the role that the ISP plays is what Internet Service Provider plays is it ensures that we are connected to the internet. It ensures that we get access to the internet. Now let's take a look at the domain name. What is a domain name? A domain name is used to identify one or more IP addresses. Users use the domain name. E.g., we have a domain name like www.github.com. You guys should forget of this. We'll get into it shortly. Just take this Look at this. This is what? A domain name www.com, which are saying that it is what is used to identify one or more what IP addresses. Users enter this what domain name, which gets it lands you to a website on the internet. When you type that particular domain name, your browser uses, with the help of what, a DNS, take a look at what your URL, this whole thing, then look for an IP address that corresponds to it, then send your request to the server. That brings us to the what? The DNS. What is a DNS? A DNS is also an acronym that stands for Domain Name System, and it is a distributed database which keeps track of computers' domain names and their corresponding IP addresses on the internet. And do not worry if you don't understand what a distributed database is. Just know that DNS exists so users can enter the URLs instead of what IP addresses. We will delve into this DNS and why they are in the picture. Now, what is HTTP? HTTP is also an acronym which stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. A protocol is just a set of rules, like a language, in which computers communicate with each other. I'm communicating with you guys in normal plain English, but with the help of the HTTP, computers are able to communicate with each other, and the UVI protocol is the protocol that the computers will use to communicate with each other. Now, this brings us to URL. What is a URL? URL is also an acronym which stands for Uniform Resource Locators, either a locator or locators. The URL identifies a particular web resource. E.g., you have https www.github.com. Let's come here. This whole thing is our URL. Now, let's break this down. We have a protocol, which we say this is the language the computers will use to communicate with each other. This is what HTTPS. I'll explain what HTTPS means and what HTTP means. Then this is our subdomain. This www. Or just only this www is our subdomain. This is optional, and it's also an acronym that stands for World Wide Web. There are some websites that do not use www. It's fine. You can still work. Your website can still function effectively without www. So if you like, you can use www. If you want, you will leave it. Now, we have our domain name, which is the github.com. This domain name is unique. Then we have our path. We use the path to specify which file we need. Let's take it that we are making a request to our server and we want some particular file there. We don't want any other file, but want some particular file. So with the help of the path, so when you put slash and the file name there, you will get that precise file. You can omit it. Then what happens is it just goes straight away to the what? When you make the request, go straight away to the server and it brings the normal HTML file there. Now, let's actually start to understand things very well. We are just brushing through, but in this we are now going to understand what the whole thing actually means. Now, this is our user sitting beautifully with his computer or her computer. It makes a request. First of all, yes, you make a request. You enter https www.github.com into your web browser with Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer. Then you expect to land on this website. Let's picture this as what? Our github.com. This is our website. And now, this is what we expect, isn't it? Good. Stuff's happening with it. Now, see, when you input https github.com into your web browser, quickly you land on, with how fast, depending on how fast your internet is, you land on what? The website you want to go to. But stuff's happening under the hood, stuff's happening behind the scenes, and that's what we are interested in. But before that, let me explain what HTTPS and HTTP means. HTTP is Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and HTTPS means Hypertext Transfer protocol security. The difference between HTTP and HTTPS is with HTTP, your website is not secured. Spammers or cyber attackers can inject malicious code into your website and they will get certain sensitive data. Let's take out your website has a form where it accepts users' data such as their name and password. These stuffs are supposed to be a secret between your web server and your web browser. If you are running your website on HTTP, it's not secured. Basically, it's not encrypted. So the data is exposed to them. But when you run it on HTTPS, it's encrypted. We call it end-to-end encrypted or user or client and server encryption. They encrypt the data behind the scenes so that even if a spammer injects those malicious codes, the spammer will just see an encrypted data. The spammer will be able to read what actually it is. So it's good you run your website on HTTPS but not HTTP. Now let's look at what is happening here. This is our client. Now our client has entered a URL https://www.github.com/index.html. What is happening here? Our client is making a request to the server. It says, server, please give me this index.html file. Now your browser doesn't understand where this index.html file is located. Basically, it doesn't know the server where this index.html file is hosted. So what do your browser does? It contacts the DNS. We mentioned of DNS. The DNS, the domain name system, which is also a software installed on your browser, and it picture the DNS as the middleman or the betweener, which is in between the URL and your IP address. Now what the DNS does is it will look at the URL, which is what the github.com, then look at the other side, check an IP address that corresponds to what http://www.github.com/index.html. If it gets an IP address that corresponds to it, then the DNS will now send that IP address back to your web browser. Then your web browser will now use the IP address, then send it to the server. Then when it gets to the server, it says, server, please get me index.html. Then your server will now say, okay, wait, let me check and see if index.html file is actually there. If it sees it there, if the server looks through and it sees the index.html file, this is what happens. The server now says, okay, if the index.html file is there, you can have it. Then it gives you a static code of what? HTTP 200. If it's 200, means that it's okay, your index.html file is there. Then it sends it back to your browser. Then your browser now knows the HTML page or the HTML file. And the HTML is just hypertext markup language. It's used to make the structure of the website. If this is successful, now it looks at the HTML file or the HTML code to see whether there are other files or assets such as CSS file and JavaScript files. So the server will quickly look at if there are CSS file, then it will load it to that one. The CSS file will also follow. Then your JavaScript file will also follow onto your website. We'll be delving into them in the future episodes. Now there are also instances that the server that looks through its data center and does not find this index.html file. So what does it do? It gives you an error, which mostly is 400. HTTP start to go 4 is forward. 404 and 400 are actually similar. 404 means that it's not found. 400 also means that it's not found. What you are actually asking for is not found on the server. So basically, that's how the web works. A quick recap: you make a request into your web browser, which you input your URL http://www.github.com/index.html. Now your web browser quickly contacts the DNS, domain name system, to look for an IP address that corresponds to the URL you've input. If it gets it, it sends it back to your browser. Then your browser will now send the IP address to the server and tell the server to give it index.html. Then the server looks through its data center to see if there is an index.html there. If there is, then it sends it back to the browser. Then it loads it to the page for you, the user, to use and do whatever you want to do. So basically, that's how the web works. In our next video, we'll be looking at the roadmap to becoming a web developer. Thank you all.